They may never look directly into your eyes and say, "I love you." But the next time they break down or become overwhelmed, pay close attention to how they respond. Their actions can reveal emotions they simply cannot put into words. Avoidant people rarely express love through obvious declarations. Instead, their feelings often appear quietly through small, almost hidden behaviors. Once you learn how to recognize those subtle expressions, their silence may no longer feel like rejection. Over the next few minutes, you're going to discover one of the most misunderstood behaviors an avoidant can show when they feel they might lose someone they genuinely care about. From the outside, it can look like distance, coldness, or emotional withdrawal. That is exactly why so many people get it wrong. They spend months convincing themselves that the relationship meant nothing, when the reality may be that the avoidant was struggling with fear and emotional overwhelm. Stay until the end, because the final sign is the one almost everyone overlooks, and strangely enough, it may reveal more than all the others combined. Before we go further, I want you to do something simple. If anything I describe reminds you of someone you know, or someone who once meant everything to you, type the word "seen" in the comments. I read the comments, and I can tell you this: if this story feels painfully familiar, you are nowhere near alone. There are countless people carrying the same unanswered questions, the same confusion, and the same quiet heartbreak. So, if you ever cared deeply about someone who simply couldn't say those 3 words back, leave the word "seen" before you continue watching. It takes only a second, but it lets me know you are here, and it reminds someone else that they aren't the only person trying to understand this experience. I'll return to your comments later, but for now, leave your word and stay with me. One of the biggest misunderstandings about avoidant attachment is the belief that it stops someone from feeling love. That isn't necessarily what happens. What it often interferes with is their ability to express love in the familiar ways most people expect. And this is the part that almost never gets explained properly. Once you understand it, everything can start to look different. An avoidant person isn't automatically cold, heartless, or incapable of caring. More often, they are someone who learned very early that depending on another person could come with emotional danger. Maybe they grew up with a caregiver who was physically around but emotionally distant. Maybe they lived in a home where feelings were treated as weaknesses or problems, instead of emotions that deserved understanding. Or perhaps they learned that looking for comfort only resulted in disappointment. Eventually, they began believing that it was safer not to expect anything from anyone. With time, that experience can shape the nervous system around independence, distance, and emotional self-protection. And that pattern doesn't suddenly disappear just because they fall deeply in love. Imagine growing up in a place where crying brought criticism, rejection, dismissal, or punishment instead of comfort. Imagine learning before you were even old enough to understand your own feelings that showing pain only made things more difficult. Eventually, hiding vulnerable emotions became the safest choice available. This isn't simply a personality trait. It can become a survival response created by a child who didn't have healthier tools, and then carried into adulthood because, at one point, it helped them feel emotionally protected. When you meet an avoidant adult, you aren't necessarily meeting someone without emotional depth. You may be meeting someone whose emotions were never given enough permission to exist openly. So they learned to keep everything locked inside, where it felt safer, quieter, and easier to control. This is exactly why avoidant behavior can become so confusing for the people who care about them. From the outside, their silence can easily look like indifference, but internally, something completely different may be happening. Many avoidant people can experience emotions with surprising intensity, and that intensity can become frightening because emotional closeness activates old protective responses. Their body may respond to deep intimacy, almost like another person responds to physical danger. Long before they consciously understand what is happening, their nervous system can begin sending an alarm because somewhere deep inside, closeness became connected with pain, disappointment, or loss of control. So when they genuinely love someone, Their body may recognize that connection before their words ever do. That recognition can appear through quiet behaviors most people completely miss. To someone expecting constant reassurance, those behaviors may even look like emotional distance. But once you understand what you are actually seeing, those small actions can communicate care more honestly than a dramatic confession ever could. This is why you should be careful before reaching a quick conclusion about avoidant behavior. Many relationships fall apart because fear is mistaken for a lack of love. One of the first and most overlooked signs appears in something incredibly ordinary. An avoidant may suddenly begin telling you about their day without you asking. They might tell you where they're going, what they're doing, who they're with, or when they expect to return, even though you never ask for those details. To most people, these updates seem completely normal and almost meaningless. But for someone whose natural instinct is to keep their personal world private, voluntarily sharing those details can mean something much deeper. It can mean they are slowly making room for you inside a part of their life they normally protect. Every small detail they offer is another tiny piece of trust being placed in your hands. So, if your avoidant partner suddenly starts sending messages like, "Running a little late, I'm at my sister's house," or "I'll be home around 9, when they never used to communicate that way, don't immediately dismiss it as ordinary conversation. The real meaning may have very little to do with simply reporting their location. Instead, it can be a quiet invitation into their world. Their usual pattern may be to keep information to themselves with almost everyone, regardless of how much they care about them. That's why these spontaneous updates can matter so much. They may signal that the emotional walls they have spent years building are slowly beginning to come down, one small piece at a time. It isn't necessarily about obligation. It isn't about being forced to explain themselves. It can be one of those subtle ways an avoidant communicates, "I trust you enough to let you into my world," even if they never consciously realize that is exactly what they are doing. What looks completely ordinary to most people can actually represent a major step for someone who normally protects their independence. The next sign is even harder to identify because it can look almost exactly like the opposite of love. It appears when they suddenly pull back after a moment of deep emotional connection. Maybe you spent an amazing evening together. Maybe you opened up to each other, shared vulnerable thoughts, and felt closer than you had in a very long time. Then, almost without warning, they become quieter, more distant, less available. This is usually where people begin blaming themselves. They start replaying the conversation, wondering what they said, what they did, or what suddenly went wrong. But inside an avoidant person, something very different may be happening. Emotional closeness can activate old protective patterns. Their nervous system may react as if it needs to create distance, not because they suddenly stopped caring, but because caring that deeply feels overwhelming. Their withdrawal may be an attempt to calm what is happening inside them, rather than a deliberate attempt to reject you. This is one of the biggest misunderstandings people face when loving someone with avoidant patterns. Sometimes, the stronger the emotional connection becomes, the stronger their instinct to retreat can become as well. That reaction isn't necessarily meant to punish you or announce that their feelings have vanished. It can be a coping strategy that has been reinforced for years. And here is where things become especially confusing. The moments when they seem the most distant can sometimes come directly after the moments when they felt the closest. If you immediately respond by chasing them, demanding reassurance, sending endless messages, or reacting with anger, you may unintentionally strengthen the fear that is already driving their withdrawal. But when you stay grounded, give them breathing room without abandoning your own emotional needs, and refuse to interpret every moment of distance as personal rejection, something unexpected can happen. Once their nervous system settles down, they may naturally begin moving toward you again. They may choose connection because it feels safe, not because they were pressured into it. And that difference matters more than most people realize. Another powerful sign can be found in what they repeatedly do, rather than what they openly say. So watch their actions much more carefully than their words. Their behavior may be telling you something their mouth is still unable to admit. An avoidant may find it difficult to say, "I love you," yet somehow they can communicate those feelings through practical acts of care. They might fix something that has been bothering you, offer assistance before you even think to ask, or notice a problem in your life and quietly take care of it without waiting for appreciation. Maybe you casually mentioned that your back had been hurting, and several days later, you discover a heating pad waiting for you. Perhaps they notice that a certain expense has been creating stress for you, so they quietly take care of it and never bring it up again, because praise was never what they wanted. These gestures aren't meaningless acts of kindness. For many avoidant people, actions become the safest form of communication when emotional words feel too exposed or vulnerable. If you often catch yourself thinking, "They almost never tell me how they feel, but whenever I truly need them, they're there," you may be seeing exactly how an avoidant expresses genuine love. Their affection is often revealed through dependability, quiet assistance, and thoughtful problem-solving, instead of emotional speeches or dramatic declarations. While many people expect love to be spoken openly, avoidant people often build relationships through what they consistently do. In their mind, they are showing you exactly how important you are, even when they cannot translate those emotions into the words you desperately want to hear. Their feelings can exist in the things they repair, the burdens they quietly remove from your shoulders, and the moments when they step forward without being asked. Understanding this doesn't mean you should ignore your own emotional needs. It simply helps you recognize that love can sometimes communicate through a completely different language than the one you expected. And there is another subtle change that can carry tremendous meaning. Once you know what to look for, you may start noticing it everywhere. Avoidant people are often deeply private. They can be uncomfortable discussing painful memories, difficult emotions, or experiences that expose their most vulnerable sides. When a conversation starts entering emotionally sensitive territory, their natural response may be to change the subject, make a joke, or move the discussion towards something that feels easier to control. That is why it matters when they finally respond to a difficult question, instead of avoiding it. If you gently ask about their childhood, previous relationships, fears, insecurities, or emotional struggles, and they decide to share even a small part of their story, don't underestimate that moment. To you, it might sound like an ordinary conversation. To them, it can represent a significant act of trust. They are giving you access to hidden parts of themselves that they normally keep protected from almost everyone. And that kind of openness can be far more meaningful than it appears on the surface. But there is one more pattern that confuses people more than almost anything else. Sometimes an avoidant starts creating tension or emotional distance exactly when the relationship seems happier and safer than ever. Just when everything appears peaceful, connected, and stable, something suddenly shifts. They may become unusually critical, emotionally unavailable, irritated, or start arguments that seem to have no real purpose. From the outside, it can look like they are deliberately destroying something good. In some ways, it can resemble self-sabotage, but the reason behind it isn't always cruelty or manipulation. Deep underneath, many avoidant people carry an expectation that close relationships will eventually bring pain, disappointment, rejection, or a loss of personal freedom. Before that feared outcome has the chance to happen naturally, their protective instincts may begin preparing them for it. So if your relationship repeatedly experiences strange emotional turbulence during the moments when everything seems healthiest, don't automatically assume that you're the problem. Sometimes recognizing the pattern calmly, instead of responding with blame, can interrupt the cycle and create room for a completely different reaction. And if you're starting to recognize several of these behaviors in someone from your own life, type "seen" in the comments once again. You may be realizing that some moments you once interpreted as rejection were actually signs of fear that you simply didn't have the emotional language to understand at the time. That realization alone can change the entire way you look back at the relationship. Because sometimes what looks like someone deliberately pulling away is actually someone struggling with feelings they were never taught how to carry safely. And now we come to another sign that often hides inside ordinary conversations about the future. Most avoidant people are cautious about making long-term plans because talking about tomorrow can feel emotionally risky. For them, imagining the future can also mean imagining commitment, permanence, and deeper emotional dependence. And commitment can activate many of the same fears that intimacy does. So if they suddenly say something like, When we go to my cousin's wedding next spring, or jokingly tell you, "You'll probably be tired of me by our third Christmas together," don't immediately laugh it off as meaningless conversation. Those little comments can carry far more emotional weight than they seem to. In that moment, they are quietly imagining a future that includes you. They are allowing themselves to picture lasting connection, even while another part of them is telling them to remain guarded. For someone who normally avoids thinking too far ahead, casually placing you inside their future can be a surprisingly powerful expression of attachment. Another important clue appears when life becomes genuinely difficult. Avoidant people are often known for creating distance when emotions become intense, and while that pattern can certainly happen, something different may emerge when they genuinely care about someone. Imagine you're grieving the loss of someone important, dealing with a frightening personal problem, facing a serious health concern, or simply having one of those days when everything feels impossible to carry. Someone who isn't emotionally invested might use your difficult situation as another reason to disappear. But an avoidant who truly cares can sometimes surprise even themselves. They may not know what the perfect thing to say is. They may feel awkward around intense emotions. They might not even know how to comfort you properly, but they still choose to stay. They may appear at your door, call you when they normally wouldn't, check on you repeatedly, or rearrange their own plans simply to remain nearby. Their presence becomes the message. Their actions say what their voice struggles to express, and sometimes that matters more than a perfectly spoken sentence ever could. One of the clearest expressions of love from an avoidant doesn't necessarily happen during the argument. It happens after the argument is over. During conflict, they may become quiet, shut down emotionally, stop responding, or physically remove themselves from the situation. That part can be frustrating, but it isn't unusual for someone with strong avoidant patterns. What matters is what happens afterward. Someone who genuinely feels nothing may allow the silence to become permanent. They let the distance grow until the relationship slowly disappears. But an avoidant who truly values the connection often finds some quiet path back toward you. They may not immediately restart the conversation. They might not offer a perfect apology or suddenly explain every emotion they were feeling. Instead, they might make your favorite coffee, send a simple message asking if you've eaten, share something funny, or perform some small familiar act that gently restores the connection. At first, the gesture may seem completely unrelated to the argument, but underneath it is a powerful message. I don't want us to disappear. They may not know how to repair everything with words, so they repair the connection through small actions. And this is where many people miss what is actually happening. Another deeply meaningful change occurs when they begin bringing different parts of their life together. Avoidant people often keep their worlds carefully separated. Family may exist in one emotional space. Friends may exist somewhere else. Their romantic relationship may remain in another private compartment with very little overlap. Keeping these areas separate can give them a sense of control and emotional safety. That is why it can mean so much when they start inviting you into places that were previously private. If they introduce you to childhood friends, include you in family gatherings, mention you naturally when speaking with people they trust, or begin allowing different parts of their world to see you together, something important has shifted. They are no longer keeping you at a comfortable emotional distance. They are making space for you inside the structure of their actual life. That kind of inclusion can represent an extraordinary level of trust, because it means they are no longer protecting every part of themselves in separate emotional compartments. They are allowing you to become connected to more than one side of who they are. And then there is physical affection, which can reveal emotions that words never manage to express. Many avoidant people struggle to verbalize emotional intimacy, but their body language can sometimes communicate what their voice cannot. They might gently place a hand on your back while you're cooking, sit unusually close beside you without needing to talk, brush against you as they walk past, or fall asleep with an arm or leg resting against you after an emotionally exhausting day. These small moments of physical closeness are not always accidental. Sometimes the body expresses safety before the mind is ready to admit it. And if you know what you're looking for, these quiet moments can tell you far more than you realize. If someone truly felt no emotional connection to you, they probably wouldn't keep finding small reasons to be near you in everyday life. They wouldn't naturally look for your presence in those ordinary moments that seem almost meaningless. Along with that, they may remember tiny details you mentioned months ago without ever making a big deal about remembering them. Your favorite flower suddenly appears on your birthday. A meal is prepared exactly the way you enjoy it. A place you've always dreamed of visiting somehow becomes part of a casual conversation about the future. They may never explain why they remembered these things. They simply act on what they know, quietly protecting the depth of their feelings behind an attitude that makes everything look casual. And then there is perhaps one of the most personal signs of all. They allow you to see their imperfect side. Avoidant people often spend years trying to appear strong, capable, independent, and emotionally composed. They don't like revealing fear, confusion, uncertainty, or failure because being vulnerable may never have felt completely safe to them. So when they admit that work has been making them anxious, tell you they genuinely don't know what to do, or even quietly cry in front of you without immediately covering it with humor or changing the subject, stop and notice that moment. That isn't simply weakness slipping out by accident. It can be trust showing itself. Somewhere beneath their conscious thoughts, they have decided that you are one of the few people safe enough to witness the parts of themselves they have spent years keeping hidden. Very few people may ever receive that level of access to their emotional world. And that is exactly why these moments can reveal much more than a dramatic romantic confession ever could. But now we reach the sign that almost nobody talks about, even though it may reveal the most. It often appears when they genuinely believe they might lose you. Someone who feels completely disconnected usually leaves without creating much emotional uncertainty. They may disappear, move forward, and rarely look back. True indifference usually doesn't produce this strange push and pull, but when an avoidant deeply cares about someone, something unexpected can happen right before they create distance. For a short period, they may become unusually present. They ask more questions. They reach out first. They may suddenly become warmer or reveal something vulnerable that they normally keep hidden. Perhaps they quietly say, "I don't want you to think I don't care," and then almost immediately change the subject, as though they wish they could take the words back. That sudden burst of closeness before withdrawal isn't necessarily random. It can be the painful struggle between love and fear happening right in front of you. One part of them wants to move closer, while another part is desperately trying to protect them from what closeness has meant in the past. And this is where you need to be careful. Understanding these behaviors should never become a reason to remain in a relationship where your own emotional needs are constantly ignored. Recognizing the ways an avoidant may express love doesn't mean you have to spend years translating behavior that leaves you exhausted, confused, or insecure. You have every right to want reassurance. You have every right to want emotional openness. You have every right to want someone who can communicate love in a way that allows you to feel safe and valued. Understanding avoidant attachment isn't about lowering your standards or accepting less than you deserve. It's about being able to recognize fear without automatically assuming that fear means there is absolutely no love. That understanding can help you make thoughtful decisions instead of reacting from confusion, anxiety, or emotional pain. Compassion for someone else's attachment pattern should never require you to abandon your own emotional health or act as though your needs don't matter. If you're dealing with this kind of dynamic right now, the most helpful response usually isn't to chase them every time they pull away. Most people naturally respond to distance by sending more messages, demanding explanations, asking for reassurance, or desperately trying to restore the connection. But those reactions can sometimes strengthen the exact fears that are causing the withdrawal. Avoidant people often settle more easily around consistency than emotional intensity. So instead of disappearing to punish them or pursuing them endlessly, try remaining steady, warm, and emotionally grounded.